Okay, this is Soylent Green by Wumpscut.
Soylent Green is people!
Yeah, Soylent Green is human flesh. Subtle. But Rudy Ratzinger didn't just sample an old science fiction movie because German sounded evil. He basically took a 1973 film, cut it into pieces, put those pieces into a sampler, and rebuilt the story as a 6-minute industrial club track. And somehow during all of this, we're gonna go from cannibalism to climate change, old Akai samplers, Saturday Night Live, to Atari. And eventually to a company that decided that Soylent would be a good name for food.
This is Strawberry Soylent.
Anyways, let's get to it. The film. Soylent Green came out in 1973. The Wumpscut track came out in 1993, exactly 20 years later. And the film takes place in 2022, which is now slightly less futuristic. Fortunately, we didn't end up eating each other as green crackers, well, at least not officially. So Charlton Heston plays the detective Robert Thorne. New York is more than 40 million people, it's overcrowded, constantly hot, natural food has almost disappeared, and most people survive on processed wafers produced by the massive Soylent Corporation. Soylent Red, Soylent Yellow, and the exciting new product, Soylent Green. Real meat has become so rare that there's a scene where people react to a piece of beef like someone has just opened a suitcase full of gold. And Rudy actually samples that scene. Thorne investigates the murder of a Soylent executive and eventually discovers why the company has a supply problem. The oceans are dying. The plankton they supposedly used to manufacture Soylent is disappearing. So apparently someone at Soylent asked, what other sources of protein are readily available? People. Dead bodies are being processed into food and fed back to the population. Hence, Soylent Green is people. The book doesn't even have that twist. And here's the first weird thing. The film is based on Harry Harrison's 1966 novel Make Room, Make Room. But the famous cannibalism twist, not in the book. In Harrison's story, Soylent is basically made from soy and lentils. That's where the name comes from. No human meat. Hollywood added that. Harrison later said he was only around 50% pleased with the movie. He thought they had turned his story about population pressure and resource scarcity into a Hollywood murder thriller. Although he admitted at least the main warning survived. Soylent Green, 50% approved by the author.
You know, if I had the money, I'd smoke 2-3 of these every day.
Why did they change the title? And apparently one reason MGM didn't call the movie Make Room was because of the TV comedy Make Room for Daddy. The studio apparently didn't want audience confusing a bleak cannibalistic environment dystopia with Danny Thomas family sitcom. Reasonable? Although I would absolutely watch Make Room for Daddy, The Cannibal Years. This was 1973. And this is where the movie becomes more interesting because it's dealing with extreme heat, population, resource shortages, dead oceans, food collapse, and the greenhouse effect.
There's food causing the water. How can anything survive in a climate like this? A heat wave all year long.
Greenhouse effect. Everything is burning up.
In 1973, Earth Day had only started a few years earlier. The limits to growth had appeared in 1972. Environmental collapse was becoming a mainstream fear, and Soylent Green basically asks, what happens when humans consume everything? Its answer, eventually, we start consuming ourselves.
Oh my god.
Then Rudy gets a hold of it. 20 years later, Rudy Ratzinger turns it into Soylent Green, or Soylent Green, opening track on Music for a Slaughtering Tribe, which remains an absolutely fantastic title. Rudy started Wumpscut in 1991. Before that, he had been DJing, and you can hear that mentality immediately. This thing is not musically complicated, it's extremely economical, on Deutsch. Kick, bass, motive, voice, sample, repeat. Rudy called his style end-tight EBM, end times electronic body music. And if anything qualifies, this does. And he was making this in a Landshut. And I love this detail. This apocalyptic industrial soundtrack wasn't coming from some abandoned Berlin power station. Rudy was based in Landshut, Bavaria. The CD says produced and mixed at Wump Studios in 1993 in LA. And no, that's not Los Angeles. It's Landshut. So somewhere in Bavaria, one guy with samplers and synthesizers is turning a 1970s cannibalism movie into club music. Excellent. Großartig. The German samples. And this is where the track gets clever. Rudy uses the German dub, not the famous Charlton Heston line, and the German voices make the whole thing sound less like a movie and more like some horrifying bureaucratic recording. And one of the early samples is Rindfleisch, Miss Shirl, beef, Miss Shirl. That establishes scarcity. Then later, was hat gebeichtet? What did he confess? And Gott möge uns schützen. May God protect us. Then the ecological explanation arrives. Die Ozeane sind leer, das Plankton geht zugrunde. The oceans are empty, the plankton is dying. Then, die Menschheit muss es wissen. Humanity must know. And finally, es ist Menschenfleisch. It is human flesh. Perfect industrial vocabulary. The samples are a part of the composition. And Rudy isn't placing these randomly. Look at the sequence. Real meat is rare. Someone confessing something horrific. The oceans are dying. The plankton is disappearing. Humanity needs to know. And finally, Soylent Green is human flesh. He's basically re-editing the investigation. The samples are doing the job traditional lyrics would normally do. They introduce the worlds, build suspense, reveal information, then deliver the climax. The movie dialogue is basically another instrument. The music. Now let's look underneath all that. Roughly 122 beats per minute, it's 4/4, and the harmonic world is around C minor. So we've got C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat. Nothing exotic. And the opening keyboard motif we analyzed is basically built around only E flat, G, and A flat. And then this little move, G, A flat, is only one semitone, but it immediately creates tension. This is one of my favorite lessons from the track. You don't need 8 chords. Sometimes you just need 2 notes that hate each other. The bass. And the bass line uses basically the same tiny note pool. A lot of G, then E flat, A flat, back to G. Repeated 8 notes, very small variations, and that's it. Because in EBM, repetition is not necessarily a lack of songwriting. You create the machine, then change what happens around it. The sound. So if I wanted a bass in this territory today, saw wave, maybe a quieter square underneath, mono, fast attack, short delay, short release, low pass filter, saturation, and don't make it enormous modern sub bass. You want mid-range, you want bite, you want to actually hear the thing. The drums are similar, blah, blah, blah. The drums are similar, I can't even say this word anymore. The drums are similarly basic. Kick, snare, closed hi-hats running at 16ths, an open hat accent, and a lot of the arrangement comes from simply taking things away. Remove the kick, suddenly the sample feels massive. Bring the kick back, and the sample loop suddenly feels heavier. Nothing new is added. That's arrangement through subtraction. The sampler. And probably the most important early Wumpscut instrument was the sampler. We do not have an exact 1993 Soylent Green equipment list, so be careful when someone confidently tells you which synth made every sound. But Rudy has said his first instrument was a sampler. Then he used a borrowed Roland D50. Later his studio became ridiculous. Akai samplers, Emu and Sonic, Kurzweil, 808, 909, SH101, JD800, Waldorf, Oberheim, and eventually, haha, the Access Virus. Yes, but that's a different video. Back then, sampler memory was expensive. You couldn't just drag a 2-hour movie into Ableton and choose the line, trim it, cut the silence, and keep what mattered. That limitation probably helped create his entire style of industrial sampling. Every sample had to earn its memory. Wumpscut never played live. And despite Wumpscut becoming one of the biggest names in dark electro, Rudy basically never performed the project live. No touring band, no normal concert history. He said he couldn't reproduce the music live to the standard he expected. So Wumpscut stayed fundamentally a studio project. And honestly, kind of makes sense. These records don't sound like performances, they sound like constructed objects. The remixes. And because one version apparently wasn't enough, there are loads. The original, Rudy's extended mix, a roughly 10-minute Hojob remix, a Hojob no movie remix which removes the film dialogue, Brain Leisure versions, a draft, an instrumental take, and Soylent Green, a German language vocal version, which basically turns the entire thing into one long German dystopian broadcast. Lovely. But Soylent Green never really left pop culture. And here's something interesting. Rudy wasn't digging up some completely forgotten 1970s film. Soylent Green was still floating around pop culture, and in 1993, the exact same year Wumpscut released his track, Saturday Night Live did an entire Soylent Green sketch. Phil Hartman played Charles Heston, and the joke was basically, Hollywood keeps making Soylent sequels, but every new product still turns out to be people. Soylent White, people. Soylent Cow Pies, also people. Soylent Green too. Yep, people. So by 1993, the final line had already become such a recognizable joke that the mainstream American television could build an entire sketch around it. The Simpsons got there too. And only a few months before that, in 1992, The Simpsons was already making Soylent Green jokes. And they kept doing it because by this point, Soylent Green is people was no longer simply a movie quote. It had become a shorthand for something horrible being hidden inside ordinary consumer products. Which is probably why it works so well in industrial music. German punks also stole the name. And Rudy wasn't even the first German alternative musician to steal from the movie. There was a Berlin punk band in the 80s called Soylent Green? With an I? And two of the people involved were Bella B and Farin Urlaub, who later formed Die Ärzte, the Doctors. So apparently German musicians have been looking at this movie for decades and thinking, yeah, that's a band name. And then somebody actually called food Soylent. And then reality eventually caught up with the joke. In 2010, someone launched an actual meal replacement drink called Soylent.
I know some of you have told me not to drink Soylent because it's made of people.
Yeah, actual food called Soylent.
And also, it comes from genetically modified soybeans. We do know that this is a bioengineered GMO product. Gross.
The founder points to the original novel where Soylent really is made from soy and lentils, which is technically correct, but still. Calling a futuristic processed food Soylent is unbelievably brave branding decision. No human flesh. Probably should have been printed on the bottle. Video game history. There's also a fantastic random detail in the original film. A woman is shown playing an arcade game called Computer Space, released in 1971. And it's generally credited as the first video game used as a movie prop. Its creators, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, who went on to found Atari. So hidden inside Soylent Green is a tiny piece of video game history. Edward G. Robinson. And there's the darkest real-life story. Edward G. Robinson plays Sol Roth. During the film, he was reportedly almost completely deaf. He had to rehearse dialogue so carefully that he could follow the rhythm of the other actors. There are even stories when Richard Fleischer shouted, "Cut!" Robinson sometimes kept acting because he simply couldn't hear. Then there's his euthanasia scene. Sol watches giant images of forests, animals, fields, a natural world that no longer exists. Classical music plays, and Robinson himself was seriously ill. Soylent Green was his 101st and final film. He died shortly afterwards. Once you know that, that scene becomes very different. Why this track still works. Shit, if you've gone to an industrial gothic club in the last, well, ever, you've probably heard this track. So why does Soylent Green still work more than 30 years later? Because everything points in the same direction. The film, the samples, the bass, the repetition, the distorted vocals, the artwork, even the limitations of the equipment. The beat sounds like machinery. The voice sounds like evidence. The bass keeps operating whether you want it to or not, and the song slowly reveals what the machine is actually doing. Rudy didn't just write a song about Soylent Green, he put the movie inside a sequencer and turned it into EBM, which, to be fair, is probably exactly where Soylent Green belongs. Soylent Green is Menschenfleisch.